He had many nicknames: the Quiet Tiger, the Cincinnati Flash, and the Cincinnati Cobra. He was one of boxing's most skilled craftsmen, displaying subtle brilliance in a sport that celebrated theatrics and brutality. Though he achieved victories over numerous legends, he remained mostly unappreciated, eclipsed by louder personalities, forever remaining a champion, hidden in plain sight. Ezzard Charles was born July 7, 1921, in Lawrenceville, Georgia. His family was too poor to pay Dr. Ezzard for the delivery, so they named their son after him in his honor. When he was 9 years old, his parents separated, and he moved to Cincinnati to live with his grandmother. In the same household were his great-grandmother, 2 aunts, an uncle, and 4 Cocker Spaniels. Charles was given the family nickname of Snooks and grew up under strict rules. He was a well-behaved, diligent student, excelling in all sports. His favorite sport was boxing, inspired by fighters like Jack Johnson and Tiger Flowers. But it was a visit by Kid Chocolate at Cincinnati that inspired Charles to become a boxer. He raised money by washing cars and selling newspapers, earning the 50 cents required to work out in the local gym, where he met Bert Williams, who became his first trainer. Williams was a square-jawed Welshman who carried scars of the First World War on his legs and ribs. Williams immediately saw the potential in Charles, who, in his words, moved his hands faster than any boy he had ever seen. Charles began entering tournaments at the age of 16, winning 42 straight amateur fights, 2 AAU titles, and the National Golden Gloves in the middleweight division. Outside the ring, Charles started working for Max Elkis at his clothing store. Charles worked in the stockroom, often making 50 to 75 trips a shift up to the store's second floor. He used to take those 18 steps in 3 jumps, Elkis said. Up and down, that's the way he built strength into his legs. Charles turned professional on March 12, 1940, earning $5 for knocking out Melody Johnson in 4 rounds. Starting his career as a middleweight, Charles fought almost exclusively in Cincinnati. He was floored for the first time in his career against veteran Billy Bengal, but arose to take a decision. Local fans and writers quickly took a liking to Charles, often packing Cincinnati's Music Hall Arena to see him in action. Reporters dubbed him as a blackout boy, a flashy knockout artist renowned for his signature bolo punch, a twisting right uppercut aimed at his opponent's solar plexus. Charles won 17 consecutive fights before facing the vastly more experienced Ken Overland, a veteran of 149 bouts. It was a highly anticipated match that drew over 10,000 fans. Though Charles lost by decision, he made an impressive showing. His trainer, Bert Williams, felt he needed more polish and sent him to New York to spar with more experienced fighters. But Williams was bought out of his contract by Charles's boss, Max Elkis, along with 2 other Cincinnati businessmen in Charlie Dyer and George Rhine. Williams became bitter, feeling rejected after spending the last 6 years developing Charles, only to have others reap the reward. Angered, he offered to work the corner of Anton Christoforidis, who faced Charles in January of 1942. "Put me in Christo's corner," Williams said, "and I'll see to it that Christo knocks Charles so stiff he won't bend for a week." Unfortunately for Williams, Charles knocked out Christoforidis in the 3rd round. After losing a split decision to Cuba's Kid Tenero due to his admittedly poor conditioning, Charles upset favorite Charlie Burley with back-to-back decisions. Now moving up to the light heavyweight division, he outpointed Joey Maxim twice before being floored 4 times and losing a decision to Jimmy Bivens. A little under 3 months later, Charles suffered his worst outing as a pro, getting floored 8 times before being stopped in the 8th round by Lloyd Marshall. Charles's handlers claimed he had a hip injury, which accounted for his poor performance. 2 months later, Charles entered the Army to serve during World War II. Receiving his assignment in Italy, Charles trucked supplies to fighting forces but did not enter combat. He also traveled to Texas for an exhibition bout with Joe Louis. Ezzard tried to land a few on Joe, one soldier said, and then Joe had to bust him a few times. Rumors circulated that Charles also faced former light heavyweight champion Billy Conn in an exhibition match in Italy. According to the story, Conn made disparaging remarks about Charles, which Charles overheard. The two supposedly met in the ring where Charles floored Khan, prompting special services personnel to rush into the ring, declare the match over, and urge the audience to forget what they'd seen. But Charles denied this rumor. He believed the confusion stemmed from his exhibition match with Stanley Goich, who bore a resemblance to Khan. Charles suggested that whoever spread the tale likely mistook Goich for Khan. After his military service was over, Charles's management team sold out his contract reluctantly. The Cincinnati trio of Elkis, Dyer, and Rhine felt they were too inexperienced to take Charles to the top, so they sold out to Jake Mintz, an ex-carnival barker from Pittsburgh, and Tom Tanis. Charles returned to the ring in February of 1946. He scored a one-sided victory over the avoided Archie Moore before rematching former conqueror Lloyd Marshall. "We did it before," Marshall's manager Johnny Rogers said before the bout, "and we could do it again." Marshall started fast, flooring Charles in the first round before Charles fought back and took him out in the sixth with a body shot. Rogers later complained that Charles got the benefit of a long count and that Charles's last punch was low. "He foxed me and dumped me in the first round," Charles said, "but he only fooled me in the first round. He didn't change his tactics enough to fool me more." Charles got revenge on Jimmy Bivens as well, defeating him twice while having a Fight of the Year brawl with Oakland Billy Smith, a bout that set a new indoor gate record for Cincinnati. Denied a shot at Gus Lesnovich's light heavyweight title, Charles was now open for a shot at Joe Louis's heavyweight championship. After stopping Archie Moore in 8 rounds, Charles faced the up-and-coming Sam Baroudi. Charles outclassed his 20-year-old opponent for 9 rounds. In the 10th, Charles connected with 3 savage blows to the head that straightened Baroudi out of his defensive crouch. As the punches connected, Baroudi's eyes glazed over, his guard dropped, and he collapsed in a heap. Baroudi could not be revived. As he was being carried out on a stretcher, he briefly appeared to regain consciousness. Rushed to the hospital, he was declared dead at 4:48 a.m. the following morning. "I started on his body and then started hammering at his head," Charles said. "I'm awfully sorry this happened." Charles later met with Sam Crandall, the father of Baroudi. "This was a terrible accident," Crandall told Charles, "but our family bears no bitterness at all toward you. Don't give up your career. Keep on and win the championship." But in February of 1949, Charles was named defendant in a lawsuit filed on the behalf of Baroudi's family. He wanted to retire from the sport. 2 months went by when manager Mintz came to his grandmother's house and told the fighter to reconsider his retirement. A promoter was arranging a fight card where the proceeds would benefit Baroudi's family. Charles was offered a fight against the feared Elmer Violent Ray. "You can donate your purse," his manager Mintz told him. "Take the fight," snapped Charles. But Charles was filled with dread about stepping back into the ring. Seeking comfort, he went to his pastor, who gathered the entire congregation to pray for him. When the fight began, Charles and Ray fought to a standstill, each matching the other's strength, until Charles landed a powerful left hook that buckled Ray's knees. As Ray collapsed, Charles instinctively followed with a hard right. To his horror, Ray fell in the exact same spot where Baroudi had dropped in the same ring. Barely waiting for the count, Charles rushed over to help, refusing to return to his own corner until he was assured that Ray had fully recovered. After that, Charles rarely let a punch go with his full body weight behind it. He preferred to spear his way to points victories rather than risk another fatality. One reporter noted that the sensitive Charles was, quote, bleeding where it didn't show. In a bout against Walter Hafer, Charles hesitated to land the finishing blows when he had his opponent hurt, but his win streak of 15 straight victories put him in line to battle for the vacant heavyweight title when Joe Louis announced his retirement. Charles was matched against Jersey Joe Walcott, winning a unanimous decision over 15 dull rounds. Charles's manager, Jake Mintz, was asked if he planned a rematch, and he answered, "For what? To stink out the joint again?" Charles became a busy champion, defending his title against Gus Lesnovich, Pat Valentino, and Freddie Bashore. In September of 1950, Charles took on a comebacking Joe Louis, who returned after being out of the ring for over 2 years. Charles came into the fight as a 2-1 underdog against the legend.
Retaliatory measures now. Joe Louis is bleeding rather profusely from his nostrils. It's a milling fight now, if the word milling can be used. 2 minutes to go of the 14th round. Did Joe back up on that one? His eyes went slightly glazy on that one, as if he were tired. Joe is tired against the ropes. He looks as if that eye is paining him, and it is. It's completely closed, has been for quite some time. But instinctively, Joe fights. Now the comment around the ringside is, "Stay away, Joe. Stay away, Joe." And I guess you know the dramatic quality of that. Half a minute to go, the 14th round. The Cincinnati Cobra, still springy. Joe plodding. Well, there's the bell ending round 14, and both blows were struck after the bell. Joe Louis with the right. Ezzard Charles still on his feet, driving. Louis realizing, fighting with the great instinct of a champion. And that is not a cliche. 2 minutes to go. Final round. 15th and final round of a heavyweight championship bout here at Yankee Stadium in New York City. To go the round. Charles willing to wrap up a fight because he thinks he has it won. Joe Louis ready to slip behind with 50 seconds to go. Intense drama. Charles constantly flecking away, striking heavy blows. The fight's gone all the way, and an era ends as the bell sounds and the crowd roars its great approval. And now we're going to step into the ring for the simulcast with radio and television. So,
Judge Frank Forbes scores it 13-2, favor of Charles. Referee Mark Kahn, 10-5, favor of Charles. Winner by unanimous decision and heavyweight champion of the world, Ezzard Charles.
I'd like you to look the way you're talking. Ezzard, I'm Ted Husing. How are you tonight now?
You, I feel very well, thank you.
Well, you fought a magnificent fight, undeniably, and you were superbly conditioned, weren't you?
Well, thank you. And I'd like to give thanks to the fellows who worked with me and got me in shape for the fight and who made it possible for me to have the fight. And I'd like to express my opinion, my thoughts. Well, I'd like to give thanks to God for giving me strength and courage enough to win the fight. And since I won the championship, I feel very proud about it. And I'll try and do my best to keep it as clean as the previous fellow who just stepped down, Joe Louis. I'll try to be as much of a credit to it as he was.
Some reporters believe that Charles could have stopped Louis if he pressed the issue. "I couldn't," Charles said. "Joe was my idol. It was like beating up my own father." Charles returned home to Cincinnati to a hero's welcome. He rode in the front of a line of open cars in a 2-mile parade to City Hall. But outside of his hometown, the victory did nothing for his popularity. He had crushed a legend, and many would never forgive him. He defended his title 4 more times, defeating Nick Barone, Lee Oma, Jersey Joe Walcott again, and Joey Maxim. Charles remained an unpopular champion, with some critics now nicknaming him the Timid Tiger, as he was openly booed during his bout with Lee Oma. "I guess I will have to die before they appreciate me," Charles said after that bout. The management team of Mintz and Tanis wanted Charles to fight in their hometown of Pittsburgh and signed for a 3rd bout with Jersey Joe Walcott. Charles himself didn't want the fight. "I don't know what it's supposed to prove," Charles said beforehand. On the night of July 18, 1951, a surprise left hook from the 38-year-old Walcott knocked Charles out in the 7th round. Charles attributed the defeat to a disruption In his usual pre-fight ritual of self-hypnosis, before each match, he would hypnotize himself in the early afternoon, just before his pre-bout nap, allowing him to enter the ring fully focused. This time, however, his routine was interrupted, and he felt the lack of mental preparation may have cost him the edge he needed in the fight. "I had people in my room," Charles said, "and I didn't take my nap until late in the afternoon. They woke me up before I was ready. I remember nothing of the fight. I was still in hypnosis." Charles wanted a return bout. He had defended the title 8 times in 25 months, while Walcott had sat on the belt for over 11 months, before finally giving Charles his rematch. "I miss being champ," Charles said. "I'm like anybody who wants to be the best in whatever he's doing. I like to be the first one to win it back." Charles entered the 4th fight against Walcott as a 2-1 favorite, but he offered little offense. Every time Walcott so much as feinted with his left hand, Charles shied away. After 15 dull rounds, Walcott was awarded a decision. "I have no alibis," Charles said in a bitter tone. "They gave it to him. That's the way it has to be. I'm just another fighter. Maybe I'll never get another chance. Maybe I've had it." 2 months later, Charles lost again, this time to Rex Lane over 10 rounds. Former heavyweight champion Jack Dempsey was the referee and sole arbiter, scoring the bout 2 rounds for Lane, 1 round for Charles, and 7 rounds even. Dempsey later stated that he did not like Charles's fighting style, believing he focused too much on defense. "You must know something about defensive fighting," Dempsey said, "but your main idea has to be complete defeat of the other man." Charles returned to his winning ways 2 months later, going on a 9-fight win streak, which included a revenge decision win over Lane, a bout in which he floored his man 3 times, giving him one of the bloodiest beatings ever seen in a San Francisco ring. "I was trying for a good, clean, pretty knockout," Charles said. "I just couldn't make it." Charles dropped back-to-back decisions to Nino Valdez and Harold Johnson, but was particularly angry after the Johnson fight. Charles had dropped Johnson with a short right to the jaw in the final round, but the referee didn't give Johnson a mandatory 8 count. "I won this one," Charles said. "I beat the guy, but it's in the books that he beat me." Charles stopped Coley Wallace and Bob Satterfield next before getting another shot at the title, this go around against the new heavyweight king, Rocky Marciano, who was on a 10-fight knockout streak. Charles came in as a 4-1 underdog, but once the bell rang, he set out to prove his critics wrong. The reporters who called him overcautious, restrained, and timid ate their words as Charles met Marciano in center ring and went toe-to-toe. Reporter Pat Harmon described it as, quote, "a savage fight. 2 cavemen could not have made it more brutal. It was primitive, brawling, intense. It was an alley fight." In the 6th, Marciano threw a punch after the bell. Charles laughed. But in the 9th, Marciano nailed Charles with a punch to his Adam's apple, taking the wind out of him. This began Marciano's rally, and he took the final rounds. Charles scored a moral victory by lasting the distance. "Rocky's punch had dislocated a bone in my throat," Charles said. "To this day, I speak with a little hoarseness." 3 months later, the two were matched again. Charles was stopped in 8 rounds, but Marciano did not escape unscathed. Marciano bled from a bad cut on the outside of his nose, and the blood also flowed from the inside. Charles also opened an old wound over the Rock's left eye, but Marciano never slacked his pace, flooring Charles in the 2nd round before finishing his man in the 8th. Later, Charles admitted his mistake was to abandon the fighting style he used against Marciano in their first encounter. "I tried to do what he did to me," Charles said. "I tried to knock him out." Charles's days as a top heavyweight were now forever gone. He was a 4-1 favorite coming into a bout with journeyman John Holman and was flattened in 9 rounds. Fans and reporters wanted him to retire after back-to-back decision losses to Hurricane Jackson. One reporter wrote that he was now the slow-motion version of the Cincinnati Cobra. In 1956, Charles dropped out of the Ring magazine rankings. The first time in 14 years, he did not appear in the top 10 rankings of the magazine. Charles then retired after being fined by the British Boxing Board for persistent holding during his match with Dick Richardson. He found various odd jobs, including finding work as an aide to a juvenile court judge. Charles's weight blew up to 235 pounds, but after a little over a year, he wanted to return to the ring. The National Boxing Association recommended that any of its state commissions would suspend Charles if he attempted to fight in their states. Charles defied the rulings, traveling to West Virginia, Mexico, and later Texas. But after losing 2 of 3 fights in 1959, Charles finally called it quits. He knew his skills had eroded, but he desperately needed money. He had numerous real estate investments that went sour, draining him of resources. His house went into foreclosure, his phone was disconnected, and his car repossessed. Charles, who had earned over $1 million over the course of his career, was now broke. In 1961, he turned to professional wrestling, hoping for a job with one of the top federations. Charles found himself unable to pinpoint exactly where his finances had gone off track. He had invested heavily in a home remodeling project, a sports club business venture, and an expensive wardrobe. These expenses added up over time, with taxes siphoning off whatever was left. The thing about boxing, Charles said, was you never felt the end of good days would come. It seemed far off, but it was just a few months away. However, Charles wasn't bitter or remorseful about his time in boxing. "I'm not warped on life," Charles said. "I have a beautiful wife and 3 fine children. Everything I have I owe to boxing, and nobody owes me a thing. Not even the guys I carried around the country and spent money on." In 1968, it was revealed that Charles was suffering from amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, also known as Lou Gehrig's disease. A benefit dinner was held in his honor, and legends such as Rocky Marciano, Henry Armstrong, Archie Moore, and Muhammad Ali were on hand to raise money. As the disease slowly destroyed Charles's nervous system, he gradually lost his ability to walk and speak. His wife Gladys became his voice, translating his thoughts and feelings. Their years together allowed her to interpret his needs and words through subtle facial gestures and the few sounds he could still make, bridging the silence the illness had forced upon him. By 1972, the boxing community had largely forgotten Charles. He seldom left home, where his wife Gladys provided constant care, hand-feeding and bathing him. With the help of their son, she lifted him onto a tilt table for exercises, maintaining his strength as best she could, despite the progressive toll of his illness. By 1974, Charles was confined to a hospital room. The once great heavyweight, known for his footwork that only fellow fighters truly appreciated, was now taking life's standing 8 count from a hospital bed. He depended on others for everything, feeding, bathing, and care, yet through it all, he continued to smile. Reporter Jack Griffin attributed this to the devotion of Charles's wife Gladys, stating, quote, "I would have liked to have been a champion, but I would have rather known such a love from a woman. Charles has known both, and he understands which is the more important. When he could no longer move, when he could no longer speak, Ezzard Charles could still smile. Now I know why." Those close to him say he smiled like a champion to the very end. On May 28, 1975, he passed away in his sleep, succumbing to the same disease that acclaimed baseball legend Lou Gehrig years earlier. "I never met a man like Ez before in my life," Marciano once said. "Ez, you fought me about the very best of anybody. I couldn't put you down, and I don't think anybody can put you down. You've got more spirit than any man I ever knew."